Good morning. Good morning. It's a joy to consistently be with you guys during these days, constantly inspired by each one of you with every interaction. But also, I've been so inspired and moved by our guest speakers, Mr. Robert Katande, Dr. Erica, Dr. Zoe. Thank you so much. As you were speaking to it, I was wondering, let me let go, let her continue to speak, but I'm glad you're going to be around here so we can continue to talk. Shall we give them a hand for the amazing stuff that I'm... So today's pillar, out of the 4 pillars of Global Unites, is conflict transformation and reconciliation. And I thought it was important for us to kind of share a little bit about why we have picked these pillars and how we try to embody these pillars in our day-to-day activity. And so I want to begin with this whole concept of reconciliation. And this is something that I have spent a lot of time with the national directors in our conversations and in our trainings. But we want to move, for the first time I heard, I'm sorry, this is not it. Can we go to Tikkun Ulam? How many of you have heard this phrase called Tikkun Ulam? That's the first, that's okay, obviously all the Israelis are up and some of the academics. When I first heard this word, it was revolutionary for me because as I started looking at what is reconciliation? What is the true meaning of this? As a young man growing up in the midst of violent conflict, I wanted to know, was true reconciliation possible? But first of all, what does reconciliation mean? In fact, in Sri Lanka, we didn't have a translation for the word reconciliation in Sinhala or Tamil. Just about 3 years ago is when we first had it. Even then, it's not complete and it doesn't fully encompass what we're trying to pursue. So it can't just be a feeling and an emotion that we're pursuing. We need to understand what reconciliation we're looking for. And as I started looking deeper into this word, Tikkun Ulam, what I started realizing it's not just one word, but it's almost like a coalition of 3 words coming and working together as one. And those 3 words were heal, repair, and transform. Those 3 concepts coming together. These are not synonyms for each other. This is actually, Tikkun Ulam means all those 3 things working together, interspersed with one another. You cannot have reconciliation if you don't have healing. You cannot have reconciliation if there isn't a repairing of society's structures. And you cannot have reconciliation if there isn't a transformation of what you inherited. Most of the time we think, well, my enemy and I are now good, we're fine, and so let's heal and let's move on. That in itself is a big challenge. But that does not represent the entirety of the reconciliation we are pursuing here as a Global Unites family. But first of all, even to heal, we have to set a standard of what's the healing we're looking for. A healing, in the sense, it requires, number one, an acknowledgement that I am hurting. Most of the time, we're so angered by the injustices we have felt that we don't acknowledge, wait, I'm in pain right now. I'm not in my ultimate state of sobriety. I'm a little drunk in my pain. I'm wounded. And when you're wounded, decisions you make are not always the best that you normally would make. You're hurt. And there's an acknowledgement that I'm hurt and I need to heal. But there's also an acknowledgement that I have hurt my brother and my sister. That healing is not possible if there isn't that acknowledgement. You and I have been hurt and intentionally or unintentionally contributed to the hurt of the other as well. And that's an extremely important first pillar, that we become agents of healing by first representing it in our own lives, but try to heal within our societies. But that is not reconciliation in its entirety. What's the point of you and I healing our relationship if society's structures are still unjust? If the society is so broken that old wounds are reopened and new wounds are created every day, so that healing becomes null and void immediately, because tomorrow I'm reminded that society's injustice is still there. And so my reconciliation does not seem complete. Are you following with me? Therefore, we have to repair the structures. It's not just like, let's come on, let's hug it out, guys, it's all over, and we walk away. But tomorrow's, your reality, if it's different from my reality tomorrow, how can there be reconciliation? It may appear that things are sorted, but a true movement that's pursuing reconciliation needs to repair the structures that are inherently unjust for one another. And to be able to be strong enough to say, if you're truly healing and if you truly acknowledge that you have done something wrong too, you're willing to acknowledge that just me saying sorry or my community saying sorry is not good enough. What are the structures that now we can collectively work together to put right, so that you don't have to continue to suffer? That injustices against you become injustices against me. You're no longer a different subsect of society. You are part of me. That is the amazing point. I've been so amazed and inspired at our young men and women in Sri Lanka. As they have understood and have healed, now they're looking at, now I see why the Tamil community said this was unjust. And now that injustice is not just against the Tamils, it's against me. When our Muslim brothers and sisters are being attacked these days by Islamophobic groups and extremist groups, we're standing and saying, anything you do against them, you do against me. If you want to go burn that mosque, you have to go through me. Because I'm not going to allow that injustice to prevail and me turn the other way and saying, well, I'm good with that guy, but society continues to torment him. That's just the way things are. I cannot allow that to happen. What sort of reconciliation is that? If that's reconciliation, it was just a guilt-quenching experience for me. I'm good with you, right? We're good. I'm not racist, right? I'm good. I'm not racist. I have friends. Good luck having friends, but you have to be actively involved to repair the structures. How are you going to do that? And if you're truly friends, you hurt when your friends hurt. If you're truly friends, you cannot ignore their pain. You need to make room to make that right. And then finally, it's not just repairing structures, but to truly transform. From what was once flawed and broken and wrong to a transformed reality that now we have built together. Something that was almost inconceivable in the past, but now we have come and built it together. I use this illustration. It's almost like you have a house. You like your house, but you wish your hall was a little bigger. You wish the door to the kitchen was a little wider. You wish you had a bigger garden. But the next time, let's say, unfortunately, your house is burned down. Now, when you're rebuilding that house, you're not going to build that house with the same flaws that you had before. This time, the hall is going to be bigger. This time, the entrance to the kitchen, the door is going to be wider. And you're going to leave more space for you to have a bigger garden. That is the transformed reality. That's the beauty and the excitement of being part of reconciliation work, is you're creating a new reality. Reconciliation is a restoration of a right relationship. It's not a restoration of a former relationship, because most of our countries, our former relationships are pretty bad too. We may not have a collective history. We do at certain points, but for the most part, we may have a very turbulent relationship. So now what we're trying to do is building of a right relationship, where it's just and it's equal and it's fair and it's thriving. Each community is affirmed by the other, and we have new dreams and passions for our nations, and we build something. Why are you trying for a small vision and fighting for your small piece of the pie when collectively we can build something far profound, far greater? We've been fighting for our ethno-religious identity in my island. Oh, I'm a Sinhalese Buddhist. I'm a Tamil Hindu. I'm a Muslim. So we're fighting for our small identity in our small community. But when we collectively can transform and create a Sri Lankan identity that the world can respect. And not just to respect, that they can emulate, saying, Sri Lanka came together. Isn't that amazing? And they did this. They did profound things to transform their country. Isn't that greater than the small piece of the pie we're fighting for? That's a quick run-through of the way that we visualize what reconciliation is to be. And so it's not just about healing a relationship, which is very profound, but are you on the journey to bear with one another and work with one another for justice and repairing our structures? Are you also ready to dream with one another, to build something new, something far greater? Create a legacy for your generation and for other generations to follow. That's our mandate. That's our mandate, and that's why we're here. Dr. John Paul Ledrock, who's one of our advisors for Global Unites and also one of my former professors, introduced me to this diagram. Oh, I should do it myself. I didn't know that. Oops, not that. Shiva, can you help me? I'm sorry. The diagram. Okay, but in the midst, let me look at our okay, here we go. So, is there a lighter version of this? It's fine, let's go. So what he talked about was, when we're looking at and this is a lot of what you're doing at your breakout sessions, right? Is that we have to first understand the context of where we're coming from, all right? And who we are as a country and where we're engaging towards reconciliation and conflict transformation. But at the same time, we need to look at where we're going. And so it's impossible. That's why in your breakout sessions that you have been looking yesterday was at your context, understanding your context. And then today you're looking at initiatives and programs and activation points that you could do to now respond. And tomorrow you're looking at how do you then create a new future and what are the ways to sustain and help your movements thrive. Those 3 areas are what you're helping to create your 4-year plan. So as we look back at these 4 areas, you have issues, relationships, subsystems, and major systems. This is where our conflicts are kind of based on. And so we have our main issues that has led to a breaking down of relationships, that has led to a breaking of subsystems and the broader systems in society. That's where the healing and the repairing and the transformation of our societies need to take place. So we start with understanding. So most of the time, it's just on the issue, but we've forgotten that it relies on a relationship, it relies on the subsystem and the systems that we live in. But beyond that, when we look at time, this is our lived history. This is, I'm sorry the font is not showing on the screen for some reason. But over here is our lived memory of what, or recent history, historical events of what we have experienced. And so all of us have that in our memory. The last suicide bomb, the last violent election, whatever it was. These are things in our memory that's kind of informing and fueling our current issues. But then, these are things in our remembered history. We remember these things to happen. It was not in the recent past, but we remember that. And that also kind of fuels what these issues are. But then when you go even beyond that, this becomes our meta-narrative of what we have heard from history, even before our life, what we heard in that history. But in fact, how many of you, when I ask people, who's the oldest person in your family who's still alive? You might say, my grandma was about 90. And her oldest memory, or her oldest person she would have known, is about another person who's about 90 or 100 years old. So a meta-narrative that goes to about 200 years of your country's history is still connected to your lived history. So all of these things contribute to what's happening here today. So it's important for us to know we are not going to be able to even respond effectively if we don't understand where we're coming from. How have these things all morphed into what it is today? And sometimes people say, oh yeah, slavery was so many years ago, just move on. But many people, many African Americans who live today, their meta-narrative is like 200 years ago, 300, they have relatives. And that story is still part of their reality. Move on is not easy. You have to understand that hurt, understand that grievance for healing to happen. Every time that you look down on it and you negate it, you are ruining your potential for true healing, leave alone repairing, because you're not going to be partnering in the repairing process anymore. Because you don't even believe there's anything to repair. I'm done, I did the healing, that's good to go. Optics look fine, so I don't need to do any more work. But Ali asked an amazing question of, but what happens when we look at history even differently? We don't even agree on how history happened. Different tribes have different opinions. But that's one of the biggest challenges and the important exercises we do as movements is we have to start listening. How do we then come up with our collective history where we understand the grievances of the other? We feel the pain, the suffering that they have been through and try to empathize and start building, saying, this community feels that this happened, and as long as they think that's true and that's part of their hurt, that is valid enough for me to take that seriously and into consideration into how we will move forward. Am I still making sense here? And unless and until we have that figured out, we're not going to be able to engage the issues, the relationships, the subsystems, and the broader systems. And at the same time, we cannot think of a future together, of how are we going to respond the next time this cycle appears. How are we going to respond effectively in the generations to come? Let me quickly look into our own context. In Sri Lanka, almost every 15 to 18 years, we've had a blood. Oh, this is what I was looking for. Thank you. Remember this? Oh, my goodness. Okay, so we had, you can look at that later. We're moving on now. I'm on the clock. Let's keep going. You just want them to have a better look now? Okay. Thank you. All right, so when we look at our country's history, okay, these years are not numbers from the latest lottery of Sri Lankan. These are the years in which we had violent, bloody conflict in our island. This small island that all the travel magazines, including National Geographic, says the #1 tourist destination in the world. And such a beautiful island, you wouldn't imagine, in all these years, has had brutal, violent conflict. 54, 72, 83, 88, 96, 2009, 2012, and now 2019. Over 500,000 lives have been lost in 71 years of independence. Not even a century, but 500,000 people have been lost in senseless violence. And we can't blame this on Tim and his grandparents. They left in 1948. This is all us. The British did not kill these people. We killed. The Americans did not bomb us with a drone or anything. They didn't, so we don't blame you. The Indians didn't invade us. The Afghans had nothing to do with us. Sri Lankans killed Sri Lankans. 500,000 in 71 years. We have a problem. We have to understand this is what we're dealing with. 60,000 people are still missing, which means their parents or their wives or their husbands don't know whether to say that they're dead or not. They're still waiting with some sort of anticipation, that agony of not knowing. There is no closure. 60,000 people, at least. 3 million people left the island. That's another thing we all have in common. When the going gets tough, no, not really. Our people left the country. We left 3 million people. Some of our most educated, most affluent people who invested in businesses, they said, our children need a better reality. This place is messed up. Yes, it's my home, but I'm leaving. And one thing I challenge you, don't ever leave your countries. If we leave, we are quitting. Education is fine, but come back. I know it's difficult, but come back. If you are part of the Global Unites family, you are not a quitter. Don't quit your country. We stay and we fight. All right. Now, if you have relatives and friends who've left your country, don't go call them quitter. It's just an intern out there, right? Ask them to send resources to support the movement, because we have a very large diaspora funding base. And yeah, anyway, so and then at the same time, when we even try to measure the economic loss and the opportunity cost of what we've been through, it's unbelievable. And so in this context, and this is very true for many of your realities, so then how are we going to embody this reconciliation and transformation in our societies? And here's a suggestion, and this is pretty amazing. Can we go to the next slide? I didn't know Dr. Marx was going to use the same image. I didn't steal her slides. Can we go to the next? Addressing beneath the tip of the iceberg. Because most of the time, what we have thought was that violent cycle we saw in 72, in 96, in 2009, that was the problem. But ladies and gentlemen, that was just the tip of the iceberg. And every time our countries have safe passage where we feel like, oh, that's been a peaceful time, we assume, job done, we're good to go. But the majority of the problem is beneath the tip of the iceberg. And as movements that seeking to transform the realities of our nation, we attack the integral root causes and the issues that have tormented our nation for so long. Unless and until we do that, that's why we see these cycles of violence. Every 15 to 18 years in our country, we've been seeing violence. And we wonder what will happen. We're wondering what the situation was. It's not working. Okay. And so that is the big issue. How many of you have seen multiple cycles of violence in your country? Almost every one of our countries, we've seen multiple cycles. It's because we've left the problem undone and hope for the best. But our movements have to now realize, if this is our true understanding of reconciliation, if this is how we want to transform conflict, then we better go to the grass, to deep issues that are under the tip of the iceberg and start engaging. And attack there. Respond proactively to those issues. And we've started seeing that our folk, in the Chinese characteristics, you know, there's the same character that they use for crisis is also the character that represents opportunity. And as movements, we have an opportunity to look at that and say, hey, these are some of our main crises, but at the same time, these are our opportunities. I'm going to quickly run through these things. In Sri Lanka's context and many of our contexts here, segregation, disillusionment of young people, abuse that's happening, and then the demography is our key crises, but also opportunities. Oops. I don't see you as a leader anymore. In fact, the very notion that you're trying to use my people against me is the reason that I won't support you anymore. Disillusionment. One more thing, in Sri Lanka we found that out of 10,400 schools under the Ministry of Education, only 100 schools have Sinhala and Tamil medium. So most of these schools are segregated as well. Even in school, they've kept people apart because they benefit from these structures. Same time, we have large populations of young people, disillusionment of young people. They don't feel like the system's working. They don't feel the education structures are working. They don't feel that there's any hope. In fact, recently we did a survey across the country, and 65% of Sri Lankan youth said if given the opportunity, they'll leave the country. Sadly, we say sometimes the Sri Lankan dream was to leave the country. And I'm sure it's many of your countries as well. People are waiting for an opportunity. Yesterday I read that Uruguay government put a travel advisory on the United States because of gun violence. Just in this year alone, 9,000 people senselessly died because of gun violence. But at the same time, I was reading that and thinking, how many Sri Lankans or anyone from my country will stay away from going to the States if they have an opportunity to live there, even though that they have that travel advisory? There's so much desperation and frustration. So that is a crisis. That could lead people to do crazy things, but it is also an opportunity. Give them a new vision. Give them purpose. Let them be that generation that transformed their nation. Yes, our parents' generation may have failed, but you and I can build a new legacy. Let's do it. And that gives them opportunity and momentum that they're going to be part of something far greater, part of something far grander than just living within the parameters of their own selfish ambition. I'm living for something greater. And the abuse of, I'm just talking about abuse that young people are doing to themselves, growing rates of drug addiction in our countries, abuse in alcoholism and all sorts of things, because it's our coping mechanisms of pain, the depression, hurt, all sorts of pain. Young people are hurting. It is a crisis. And then the social media and all these things creating an alternate reality. They're living somewhere. They're in so much disillusionment. They don't know where to go. In that pain, in that crisis, there's an opportunity because they're crying out for people who care. They're crying out for people who spend time and invest in them. I've always said this. Today's terrorist or gang leader or extremist is yesterday's young man or woman who was looking for an identity, looking for a mentor, looking for somebody to take them seriously. The corporate world doesn't pay much attention to the young person because they're not the major part of the market. They're not spending a lot of money. The politician doesn't spend too much attention on the young person because they're not voting, or even if they're in the franchise to vote, they are not as passionate to come vote. So when most of moderate or functioning society ignores them, guess what? Extremists and gangs and other groups pay entire attention to these young people. They're full-time on them. And in the midst of their pain and their hurt, you can continue to violate and abuse them for their ends. They manipulate them. And so we are a movement that cares. How many young people are you engaging with? How are you getting to them? How do we get to those places? Be their voices. Be the Robert Katandes of your country. I care. I don't care how successful I get, I care. I was so impressed the day before when I asked him. He said, some people tell him, Robert, you made it to Hollywood. Why are you going back to the slums of Katwe? He said, because it was not about getting to Hollywood. It's about getting to the young person in the slums of Katwe. What will you do? How will we respond? It's a crisis, but it's an opportunity. And the other crisis is our countries are populated with overwhelming majorities of young people. Uganda over 70%, Afghanistan over 70%, Kenya over 60%, Sri Lanka over 48%. All these countries have an overwhelming population of youth, and if it's a crisis if we don't find meaningful ways for them to engage in our economies and our societies and in the new building of our new generation, new transformation. If you don't give them purpose, they will start continuing to cause greater damage because now they're greater in number. So how are we going to make sure that's an opportunity for us? That it's almost like a biological reset button. If this generation thinks differently, engages differently, a lot of things of the past can be undone with a new generation that thinks entirely from a different perspective. That's the business that we're engaged in. We have to try to engage. I'll close with this. Albert Einstein said, The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results. How many more cycles of violence do we want to see before we as a nation and a generation say, we have to do something differently? We need to get this right. Let's do reconciliation right this time. Let's have a clear strategy for our transformation this time. Let's engage till we see that our nations have transformed. If not, you even know the motion that people say, insanity, you know how they do this? Same thing over and over again, expecting a different outcome. You're not insane, you're brilliant. You're insightful. You guys are genius in your thinking. So now let's put that into acting. Let's transform this reality. Let's get to the root of the cause and start attacking that day in and day out. But let's understand the history and the context. Let's have a stronger resolve and a stamina to engage on the issues and for justice, not just for my people, but all of our people. And let's work till we have a dream that we can all pursue with great momentum, that is creating an inclusive nation. And to the women in the room, I want to let you know, at Global Unites, we want to ensure that there will be at least a 50% engagement. We need you. We need you leading, we need you supporting. Because I have seen this time and time again. When women have come to the table and they've engaged, they have ensured that we have transformation in mind. They're not there to mess around, and we need you there. Don't let the cultural realities or the patriarchy or whatever's going on stop you, because you are crucial. And all the men here, I know there's a lot of us who are non-white, we always complain about colonization and colonials, but when it comes to gender issues, we hold and we're so afraid to let go of power. So every time we point at the white man, remember there's stuff pointing back at us. Right? We're saying the white man needs to let go of power and create. Well, you and I need to let go of power, because they are capable, sometimes even more capable than you, many times. And we make room and say, lead, and I'll support. Because my nation's destiny is far greater than my small ego. That's why we're in here. Do you want transformation? Or do you want somebody to put your plaque on a name and say, you're the great guy, or you're a real man? We want change in our nations. For our children's generation, that we can be proud and say, we did this. And when we die, this generation, they may not know our names, but this generation was the turning point. Thank you.
Tikun Olam. Just one more round of applause for Prashan, ladies and gentlemen. Let's give him one more round of applause. Thank you so much, Prashan. So we'll just do 3 questions because of the time. I have one on Menti, and then we have Brandon and Elena on both ends. They can take the question. So Prashan, what if the history that was told was intentionally retold and filled with lies to discredit the truth? How do we heal and create a mutual narrative? Yes, Elena?
So my question is, how do we as a movement effectively engage with individuals who benefit from racism and systemic injustice in order to dismantle broken and corrupt structures and establish a greater social awareness and humane coexistence?
Good Lord. Thank you, great question.
Brandon, you have a question? Great.
Thank you. I'm Vasco Sasita from Congo Unites. After having followed the 3 elements of reconciliation, healing, repair, and transformation, I wonder how long it can take to substantiate these 3 elements, because this time I'm talking, there are 3% was died in Beni. When we go in Oicha, Beni territory, the entire population is in the street protesting what they call the passivity of MONUSCO. This population suffer the honors of war. People are beheaded. Pregnant women are disempowered. 5 years ago,